readers, and welcome to another chapter of reading. Joining us today is my lovely Corinne. I think she's had the most cameos in the entirety of doing this, but guess what? We have made it to the halfway point. To celebrate, here's some butterbeer. And I will be showing you how to make this after the chapter, in case you want to make it yourselves. It is very similar to Universal's butterbeer, if I do say so myself. And guess what? It only requires 2 ingredients. That's right, 2 ingredients. I can't wait until we reach the 3rd quarter of the mark, but until then, cheers to 100! I have a ton of fun recording these for you guys. So I'm super excited to be at 100. So again, wrong hand. Cheers to 100. Double cheers to those of you who have made it this far. I hope you continue to support me in this wonderful, magical journey. Now, onto the chapter, shall we? Chapter 6. The Noble and Most Ancient House of Black. Mrs. Weasley followed them upstairs looking grim. "I want you all to go straight to bed. No talking," she said as they reached the first landing. "We've got a busy day tomorrow. I expect Ginny's asleep," she added to Hermione, "so try not to wake her up." "Asleep, you're right," said Fred in an undertone after Hermione bade them good night, and they were climbing to the next floor. "If Ginny's not lying awake waiting for Hermione to tell her everything they've said downstairs, then I'm a flubberworm." "All right, Ron, Harry," said Mrs. Weasley on the second landing, pointing them into their bedroom. "Off to bed with you." "Night," said Harry and Ron to the twins. "Sleep tight," said Fred, winking. Mrs. Weasley closed the door behind Harry with a sharp snap. The bedroom looked, if anything, even danker and gloomier than it had on first sight. The blank picture on the wall was now breathing very slowly and deeply, as though its invisible occupant was asleep. Harry put on his pajamas, took off his glasses. Yes, this is how I look without glasses. And climbed into his chilly bed while Ron threw Outreach up on the top of the wardrobe to pacify Hedwig and Pigwidgeon. "Out of the butterbeer, Willie," who were clattering around and rustling their wings restlessly. "We can't let them out to hunt every night," said Ron as he pulled on his maroon pajamas. I've said it I don't know if I mentioned this before, but maroon is a lovely color. I'm personally fond of it. "Dumbledore doesn't want too many elves swooping around the scare. Square thinks it'll look suspicious. Oh yeah, I forgot." He crossed to the door and bolted it. "What are you doing that for?" "Creature," said Ron as he turned off the light. "First night I was here he came wandering in at 3 in the morning. Trust me, you do not want to wake up and find him prowling around your room. Anyway," he got into his bed, settled down under the covers, then turned to look at Harry in the darkness. Harry could see his outline by the moonlight filtering in through the grimy window. "What do you reckon?" Harry didn't need to ask what Ron meant. "Well, they didn't tell us much we couldn't have guessed, did they?" he said, thinking of all that had been said downstairs. "I mean, all they really said is that the Order's trying to stop people joining Bolt." There was a sharp intake of breath from Ron. "The Mole," said Harry firmly. "When are you going to start using his name? Sirius and Lupin do." Ron ignored this last comment. Yeah, you're right, he said. We already knew nearly everything they told us from using the extendable ear. The only new bit was crack! Ouch! Keep your voice down, Ron, or Mom will be back up here. You two just operated on my knees! That's a funny image. But I imagine that would hurt, though. I was enjoying my butterbeer. But I don't want it to go to waste, especially since I recently made it. Anyhow. Yeah, well, it's harder in the dark. Oh, look, we're on page 100 of part 100. And it has one of my favorite quotes. Bonus! Harry saw the word outlines of Fred and George leaping down from Ron's bed. There was a groan of bed springs, and Harry's mattress descended a few inches as George sat down near his feet. So, got there yet? Said George eagerly. The weapon Sirius mentioned, said Harry. That's it, more like, said Fred with Rose now sitting next to Ron. We didn't hear about that on the old Extendables, did we? What do you reckon it is? Said Harry. Could be anything, said Fred. But there can't be anything worse than the Avada Kedavra curse, can there? Said Ron. What's worse than death? Maybe it's something that can kill lots of people at once, suggested George. Maybe it's some particularly painful way of killing people, said Ron fearfully. He's got the Cruciatus curse for causing pain, said Harry. He doesn't need anything more efficient than that. There was a pause, and Harry knew that the others, like him, were wondering what horrors this weapon could penetrate. Ugh, I can only imagine. But I would be lying if I said I didn't want to use the Cruciatus curse on a very few select people who deserve it. I'll just put it that way. So who do you think's got it now? Asked George. I hope it's our side, said Ron, sounding slightly nervous. If it is, Dumbledore's probably keeping it, said Fred. Where? Said Ron quickly. Hogwarts? Bet it is, said George. That's where he hid the Sorcerer's Stone. Love that callback. A weapon's going to be a lot bigger than the stone, though, said Ron. Not necessarily, said Fred. Yeah, size is no guarantee of power. And I love that quote. Because being about 5 feet myself, you do not want to get me mad. I will use intimidation tactics and leave you grasping for a failed comeback. In other words, what I call my full lioness. Moving forward, said George. Look at Ginny. Oh, look, we have that in common. What do you mean? Said Harry. You've never been on the receiving end of one of her bad bogey hexes, have you? I love that foreshadowing. And in case you're wondering what a bad bogey hex is, its target produces bat-shaped bogeys out of your nose. So yeah, I don't think anyone would want to be on the receiving end of one of those. But at the same time, I would love to know what the incantation is so I can cast it on the same select few of people I would use the Cruciatus curse on. They still deserve it, trust me. Shh, said Fred, half rising from the bed. Listen. They fell silent. Footsteps were coming up the stairs again. Said George, and without further ado there was a loud crack, and Harry felt the light vanish from the end of his bed. A few seconds later they heard the floorboard creak outside their door. Mrs. Weasley was plainly listening to see if they were talking or not. Hedwig and Pigwidgeon hooted dolefully. The floorboard creaked again, and they heard her heading upstairs to check on Fred and George. She doesn't trust us at all, you know, said Ron regretfully. Harry was sure he would not be able to fall asleep. The evening had been so packed with things to think about Yeah, that's valid. I need time to process too. I mean, I'm autistic, and processing is how I try to cope with what's either said to me or what's happening. And sometimes it can be exhausting, let me tell you. But at the same time, I can also relate to Harry not being able to fall asleep, because sometimes it can keep me up at night too. Moving forward. That he fully expected to lie awake for hours and win it all over. Well, you know my thoughts on that, because of what I said before. He wanted to continue talking to Ron, but Mrs. Weasley was now creaking back downstairs again, and once she had gone, he distinctly heard others making their way upstairs. In fact, many-legged creatures were cantering softly up and down outside the bedroom door, and Hagrid, the care of magical creatures, was saying, "Beauties, aren't they, Harry? We'll be studying weapons this term." And Harry saw that the creatures had cannons for heads and were reeling to face him. He ducked. The next thing he knew, he was curled in a warm ball under his bedclothes, and George's loud voice was filling the room. "Mum says get up. Your breakfast is in the kitchen, and then she needs you in the drawing room. There are loads more doxies than she thought, and she's found a nest of dead pumpkins under the sofa." For those wondering what a drawing room is, because I was confused at first too, a drawing room is basically a large room where the owners of a house would go to entertain guests. I know, I took it as a room to do art in too. But it's not, unfortunately. Although, I guess it could be if you use art to entertain people, but it's just the general idea that I don't think art really comes to mind because you're socializing. Come to think of it, that sounds like a nightmare unless it's those you know. More butterbeer. Half an hour later, Harry and Ron, who had dressed and breakfasted quickly, entered the drawing room. A long, high-ceilinged room on the first floor, with olive green walls covered in dirty tapestries. I mean, I can understand why people would want to cover that color, but personally, I'm fond of it in small amounts. Just saying. The carpet exhaled little clouds of dust every time someone put their foot on it, and the long moss-green velvet curtains were buzzing as though swarming with invisible bees. It was around these that Mrs. Weasley, Hermione, Ginny, Fred, and George were grouped, all looking rather peculiar, as they had tied cloths over their noses and mouths. Each of them was also holding a large bottle of black liquid with the nozzle at the end. "Cover your faces and take a spray," said Mrs. Weasley said to Harry and Ron the moment she saw them, pointing to two more bottles of black liquid standing on a spindle-legged table. "It's Doxycide. I've never seen an infestation this bad. What House Elf's been doing for the last 10 years?" Hermione's face was half concealed by a tea towel, but Harry distinctly saw her throw a reproachful look at Mrs. Weasley at these words. "Creature's really old. He probably couldn't manage." "You'd be surprised what Creature can manage when he wants to, Hermione," said Sirius, who had just entered the room carrying a blood-stained bag of what appeared to be dead rats. I've been feeding Buckbeak," he added in reply to Harry's inquiring look. "I keep him upstairs in my mother's bedroom. Anyway, this writing desk." He dropped the bag of rats onto an armchair, then bent over to examine the locked cabinet, which, Harry now noticed for the first time, was shaking slightly. "Well, Molly, I'm pretty sure this is a pocket," said Sirius, peering through the keyhole. "But perhaps we ought to let Mad-Eye have a shifty at it before we let it out. Knowing my mother, it could be something much worse." Aren't you all serious? Said Mrs. Weasley. They were both speaking in carefully polite voices that told Harry quite plainly that neither had forgotten their disagreement of the night before. A loud clanging bell sounded from downstairs. Okay, because I don't have any sound effects on me on hand, we're just going to use what I've been using before, my vocal cords. So, let's see. Loud clanging bell. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. My motions for the grandfather clock like thing going back and forth. Moving forward. Sounded from downstairs. Followed at once by a cacophony of screams and wails that had been triggered the previous night by Tonks knocking over the umbrella stand. I've been telling them not to ring the doorbell, said Sirius exasperately, hurrying back out of the room. They heard him thundering down the stairs. Oh wait, that's up. As Mrs. Black's screeches echoed up through the house once more. Stains of dishonor! Filthy half-breeds! Blood traitors! Children of filth! Close the door, please, Harry, said Mrs. Weasley. Harry took as much time as he dared to close the drawing-room door. He wanted to listen to what was going on downstairs. Sirius had obviously managed to shut the curtains over his mother portrait because she had stopped screaming. He heard Sirius walking down the hall. Excuse me. Then the clattering of the chain on the front door. And then a deep voice he recognized as Kingsley Shacklebolt saying, Hestia's just relieved me, so she's got Moody to cope now. Thought I'd leave a report for Dumbledore. Feeling Mrs. Weasley's eyes on the back of his head, Harry regretfully closed the drawing-room door and rejoined the Doxy party. I would hardly call it a party, but, you know, it kind of fits with the theme we're having, even if it's not the party Harry's thinking of. Mrs. Weasley was bending over to check the page on Doxy's and Gilderoy Lockhart's Guide to Household Pests, which was lying open on the sofa. That name should be familiar to you. Right, you lot, you need to be careful, because Doxy's bite and their teeth are poisonous. I've got a bottle of antidote here, but I'd rather nobody needed it. She straightened up, positioned herself squarely in front of the curtains, and beckoned them all forward. When I say the word, start spraying immediately, she said. They'll come flying out on us, I expect. But it says on the sprays, one good squirt will paralyze them. When they're immobilized, just throw them in this bucket. She carefully stepped out of their line of fire and raised her own spray. All right, squirt! Harry had been spraying only a few seconds when a fully grown Doxy came soaring out of a fold in the material, shiny beetle-like wings, whirring, tiny needle-sharp teeth bared, its fairy-like body covered with thick black hair, and its 4 tiny fists clenched with fury. Harry caught it full in the face with a blast of Doxy's eye. It rose in midair and fell. With a surprisingly loud thunk. Sorry, Lily. She jumped. Onto the warm carpet below. Harry picked it up and threw it in the bucket. Fred, what are you doing? Said Mrs. Weasley sharply. Spray that at once and throw it away. Harry looked around. Fred was holding a struggling Doxy between his forefinger and thumb. Righto, said Fred brightly, spraying the Doxy quickly in the face so that it fainted. But the moment Mrs. Weasley's back was turned, he pocketed it with a link. We want to experiment with Doxy venom for our snack boxes, he told Harry under his breath, deftly spraying 2 Doxies at once as they soared straight for his nose. Harry moved closer to George and muttered out of the corner of his mouth, "What are snack boxes?" "Range of sweets make you ill," George whispered, keeping a wary eye on Mrs. Weasley's back. "Not seriously ill, Mom. Just ill enough to get you out of a class whenever you feel like it." Oh, that would have been handy in 4th grade. Or, I guess more accurately, latter years of primary. Yeah, that sounds about right. Fred and I have been developing them this summer. They're double-ended, color-coded chews. If you eat the orange half of the puking pastilles, you throw up. Ugh. The moment you've been rushed out of the lesson for the hospitaling, you swallow the purple half, which restores you to full fitness, enabling you to pursue the leisure activity of your own choice during an hour that would otherwise have been devoted to unprofitable boredom. That's what we're putting in the adverts anyway, whispered Fred, who had edged over out of Mrs. Weasley's line of vision and was now sweeping a few stray Doxies from the floor and adding them to his pocket. Maybe they're using the extendable charm to fill their pockets without the weight? That's the only reason I can see this working. But they still need a bit of work. At the moment, our testers are having a bit of trouble stopping puking long enough to swallow the purple end. Testers? Us, said Fred. We take it in turns. George did the fancies. We both tried the nosebleed nougat. Mom thought we'd been dueling, said George. Joke shop's still on then, Harry muttered, pretending to be adjusting the nozzle on his spray. Well, we haven't had a chance to get premises yet, said Fred, dropping his voice even lower as Mrs. Weasley mopped her brow with her scarf before returning to the attack. So we're running it as a mail order service at the moment. We put advertisements in the Daily Prophet last week. "All thanks to you, mate," said George. "But don't worry, Mom hasn't got a clue. She won't read the Daily Prophet anymore, because it has been telling lies about you and Dumbledore." Harry grinned. He had forced the Weasley twins to take the 1,000-gallon prize money he had won in the Tri-Wizard tournament to help them realize their ambition to open a joke shop, but he was still glad to know that his part in furthering their plans was unknown to Mrs. Weasley, who did not think that running a joke shop was a suitable career for 2 of her sons. I disagree. Fred and George are perfect for a joke shop. Plus, even if you do disagree, I would recommend Molly to show support regardless, because that's what a mother would do. Moving forward. The de-doxing of the curtains took most of the morning. It was past midday when Mrs. Weasley finally removed her protective scarf, sank into a sagging armchair, and sprang up again with a cry of disgust, having sat on the bag of dead rats. I would have paid to see that in the film. The curtains were no longer buzzing. They hung limp and damp from the intensive spraying. Unconscious Doxies lay crammed in the bucket at the foot of them beside a bowl of their black eggs, at which Crookshanks was now sniffing, and Fred and George were shooting covetous looks. "I think we'll tackle those after lunch." Mrs. Weasley pointed to the... Oh, that was her voice? Oops. "I think we'll tackle those after lunch." Mrs. Weasley pointed at the dusty glass-fronted cabinets standing on either side of the mantelpiece. They were crammed with an odd assortment of objects, a selection of rusty daggers, claws, and a coiled snakeskin, a number of tarnished silver boxes inscribed with languages Harry could not understand. Wonder what languages? Maybe Latin? Yeah, Latin sounds about right. I mean, if they're so prestigious, it would make sense for the Black family to know Latin. And what else? Yeah, I like the Latin idea because, like I said, it would make sense for them to know Latin. You know? Moving forward. And least pleasant of all, an ornate crystal bottle with a large opal set into the stopper, full of what Harry was quite sure was blood. Pretty, but disturbingly. The clanging doorbell rang again. Everyone looked at Mrs. Weasley. "Stay here," she said firmly, snatching up the bag of rats as Mrs. Black's screeches started up again from down below. "I'll bring up some sandwiches." She left the room, closing the door carefully behind her. At once, everyone dashed over to the window to look down on the doorway. They could see the top of an unkempt gingery hen and a stack of precariously balanced cauldrons. "McDungus!" said Hermione. "What's he brought all those cauldrons for?" "Probably looking for a safe place to keep them," said Harry. "Isn't that what he was doing the night he was supposed to be telling me? Picking up dodgy cauldrons?" "Yeah, you're right," said Fred as the front door opened. McDungus heaved his cauldrons through it and disappeared from view. "Surely, Mum won't like that." He and George crossed to the door and stood beside it, listening intently. Mrs. Black's screaming had stopped again. "McDungus is talking to Sirius and Kingsley," Fred muttered, frowning with concentration. "Can't hear properly. Do you reckon we can risk the extendable ears?" "Might be worth it," said George. "I could sneak upstairs and get a pair." But at that precise moment there was an explosion of sound from downstairs that rendered extendable ears quite unnecessary. All of them could hear exactly what Mrs. Weasley was shouting at the top of her voice. Okay, because I do not want to lose my own voice, I am going to do it at the loudest I can. "We are not running a hideout for stolen goods!" "I love hearing Mum shouting at someone else," said Fred, with a satisfied smile on his face as he opened the door an inch or so to allow Mrs. Weasley permeate the room better. "It makes such a nice change." Oh, Fred. "Completely irresponsible! As if we haven't got enough to worry about without you dragging stolen cauldrons into the house!" "The idiots are letting her get into her stride," said George, shaking his head. "You've got to head her off early, otherwise she builds up a head of steam and goes on for hours. She's been dying to have a go at Mundungus ever since he sneaked off when he was supposed to be following her. And there goes Sirius's mum again." Mrs. Weasley's voice was lost in mid-fresh shrieks and scream from the portraits in the hall. George made to shut the door to drown the noise, but before he could do so, a house elf edged into the room. Except for the filthy rag tied like a loincloth around its middle, it was completely clothesless. It looked very old. Its skin seemed to be several times too big for it, and though it was bald like all house elves, there was a quantity of white hair growing out of its large bat-like ears. Its eyes were bloodshot and watery gray. and its fleshy nose was large and rather snout-like. The elf took absolutely no notice of Harry and the rest. Acting as though it could not see them, it shuffled hunchback, slowly and doggedly, toward the far end of the room, muttering under its breath all the while in a hoarse, deep voice like a bullfrog's. "Smells like Katrine and a criminal to boot, but she's no better nasty old. I'll trade her with her brats messing up my mistress's house. Oh, my poor mistress, if she knew that scum lay that in her house, what would she say to old creature? Oh, the shame of it! My blood's werewolves, traitors, and thieves. Poor old creature, what can he do?" "Hello, creature," said Fred very loudly, closing the door with a snap. The house elf froze in his tracks, stopped muttering, and then gave a very pronounced and unconvincing start of surprise. "Creature did not see young master," he said, turning around and bowing to Fred. Still facing the carpet, he added perfectly audibly, "Nasty little brat of a perpetrator it is." "Sorry?" said George. "Didn't catch that last bit." "Creature said nothing," said the elf with a second bow to George, adding in a clear undertone, "and there's its twin, a natural little beast they are." Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. The elf straightened up, eyeing them all very malevolently, and apparently convinced that they could not hear him as he continued to mutter. "And there's the mother, standing there cold as brass. Oh, if my mistress knew! Oh, had she cried! And there's a new boy. Creature doesn't know his name. What is he doing here? Creature doesn't know." "This is Harry, Creature," said Hermione tentatively. "Harry Potter." Creature's pale eyes widened, and he muttered faster and more fiercely than ever. "My blood is talking to Creature as though she is my friend," foreshadowing. "If Creature's mistresses saw him in such company, what she would say." "Don't call her a mudblood," said Ron and Ginny together, very angrily. "And I agree with them." We all know the power Hermione can give when someone calls her an unfriendly name. "It doesn't matter," Hermione whispered. "He's not in his right mind. He doesn't know what he's—" "Don't kid yourself, Hermione. He knows exactly what he's saying," said Fred, eyeing Creature with great dislike. Creature was still muttering, his eyes on Harry. "Is it true? Is it Harry Potter? Creature can see the scar. It must be true. That's the boy who stopped the Dark Lord. Creature wonders how he did it." "Don't we all, Creature?" said Fred. "What do you want anyway?" George asked. Creature's huge eyes darted onto George. "Creature is cleaning," he said evasively. "A likely story," said a voice behind Harry. Sirius had come back. He was glowering at the elf from the doorway. The noise in the hall had abated. Perhaps Mrs. Weasley and Mundungus had moved their argument down into the kitchen. At the sight of Sirius, Creature found himself in a ridiculously low bow that flattened his snout-like nose on the floor. "Stand up straight," said Sirius impatiently. "Now what are you up to?" "Creature is cleaning," the elf repeated. "Creature lives to serve the noble house of Black. And it's getting blacker every day. It's filthy," said Sirius. "Master always liked his little Joe," said, bowing again, and continuing in an undertone. "Master was a nasty, ungrateful swine who broke his mother's heart." "My mother didn't have a heart, Creature," Sirius snapped. "She kept herself alive out of pure spite." Creature bowed again and said, "Whatever Master says," and then muttered fiercely. Master is not fit to wipe slime from his mother's boots. Oh, my poor mistress, what she would say if she saw Creature serving him. How she hated him. What a disappointment he was. I asked you what you were up to, said Sirius coldly. Every time you show up pretending to be cleaning, you sneak something off to your room so we can't throw it out. Creature would never move anything from its proper place in Master's house, said the elf, then muttered very fast. Mistress would never forgive Creature if the tapestry was thrown out. 7 centuries it's been in the family. Creature must save it. Creature will not let Master and the blood traders and the brats destroy it. I thought it might be that, said Sirius, casting a disdainful look at the opposite wall. Should have put another permanent sticking charm on the back of it, I don't doubt. But if I can get rid of it, I certainly will. Now go away, Creature. It seemed that Creature did not dare disobey a direct order. Nevertheless, the look he gave Sirius as he shuffled out past him was redolent of deepest loathing, and he muttered all the way out of the room. Comes back from Azkaban ordering Creature. Oh, my poor mistress, what she would say if she saw the house now. Scum living in it, her treasures thrown out. She swore she was no son of hers, and he's back. They say he's a murderer, too. Keep muttering, and I will be a murderer, said Sirius irritably, and he slammed the door shut on the elf. Sirius, he's not right in the head, said Hermione pleadingly. I don't think he realizes we can hear him. He's been a gnome too long, said Sirius, taking mad orders from my mother's portrait and talking to himself. But he was always about Nittle. If you just set him free, said Hermione hopefully. Maybe we can't set him free. He knows too much about the order, said Sirius coldly. And anyway, the shock would kill him. You should just tell him that he leaves this house. See how he takes it? Sirius walked across the room, where the tapestry Creature had been trying to protect from the length of the wall. Harry and the others followed. The tapestry looked immensely old. It was faded and looked as though Doxy's had gnawed it in place. Nevertheless, the golden thread with which it was embroidered still glinted brightly enough to show a sprawling family dating tree back, as far as Harry could tell, to the Middle Ages. Large woods at the very top of the tapestry read, "The noble and most ancient house of Black, toujours pur," which is always pure, I think. Yeah, that sounds about right. You're not on here, said Harry after scanning the bottom of the tree. I used to be there, said Sirius, pointing at a small, round, charred hole in the tapestry, rather like a cigarette burn. My sweet old mother blasted me off after I ran away from home. Creature's quite fond of muttering the story under his breath. You ran away from home? When I was about 16, said Sirius. I've had enough. Where did you go? Asked Harry, staring at him. Your dad's place, said Sirius. Your grandparents were really good about it. They sort of adopted me as a second son. Yeah, I camped out at your dad's during the school holidays. And then when I was 17, I got a place of my own. My uncle Alfred had left me a decent bit of gold. He's been wiped up here too. That's probably why. Anyway, after that I looked after myself. I was always welcome at Mr. and Mrs. Potter's for Sunday lunch, though. But why did you leave? Sirius smiled bitterly, and Randa a hand through his long, unkempt hair. Because I hated the whole lot of them. My parents, with their pure-blood mania, convinced that to be a black made you practically royal. My idiot brother, soft enough to believe him. That's him. Sirius jabbed a finger at the very bottom of the tree, at the name Regulus Black. He's important later. The date of death, some 15 years previously, followed the date of birth. He was younger than me, said Sirius, and a much better son, as I was constantly reminded. But he died, said Harry. Yeah, said Sirius. Stupid idiot. He joined the Death Eaters. You're kidding! Come on, Harry, haven't you seen enough of this house to tell what kind of wizards my family were? Said Sirius testily. Were your parents Death Eaters as well? No. But believe me, they thought Voldemort had the right idea. They were all for the purification of the wizarding race, getting rid of the muggle borns and having pure bloods in charge. They weren't alone either. There were quite a few people before Voldemort showed his true colors who thought he had the right idea about things. They got cold feet when they saw what he was prepared to do to get power, though. But I bet my parents thought Regulus was a right little hero for joining up at first. Was he killed by an Auror? Harry asked naively. Oh no, said Sirius. No, he was murdered by Voldemort. Or on Voldemort's orders, more likely. I doubt Regulus was ever important enough to be killed by Voldemort in person. From what I found out after he died, he got in so far, then panicked about what he was being asked to do, and tried to back out. Well, you don't just hand in your resignation to Voldemort. It's a lifetime of service or death. Advanced Potterheads know the true way Regulus died. New Potterheads, you're gonna have to wait. I'm sorry. Lunch, said Mrs. Weasley's voice. She was holding her wand high in front of her, balancing a huge tray loaded with sandwiches and cake on its tip. She was very red in the face and still looked angry. The others moved over to her, eager for some food, but Harry remained with Sirius, who had bent closer to the tapestry. I haven't looked at this for years. There's Phineas Nigellus, foreshadowing, because he becomes important later too. My great-great-grandfather, see? Least popular headmaster Hogwarts ever had, and Araminta Maliflua, cousin of my mother's, tried to force through a ministry bill to make muggle hunting legal, and my dear Aunt Anadora, who started the family tradition of beheading house elves when they got too old to carry tea trays. Of course, any time the family produced someone halfway decent, they were disowned. Mrs. Tonks isn't on here. Maybe that's why Creature won't take orders from her. He's supposed to do whatever anyone in the family asks him. You and Tonks are related? Harry asked, surprised. Oh yeah, her mother Andromeda was my favorite cousin, said Sirius, examining the tapestry carefully. And considering what Andromeda does, and I'll get to that later, she would be my favorite cousin too. Because I feel like her and I would get along well. Said Sirius, examining the tapestry carefully. No, Andromeda's not on here either. Look, he pointed to another small round burn mark between two names. Bellatrix and Narcissa. Advanced Potterheads know the meaning of those names. And hopefully you should remember them too. Andromeda's sisters are still here because they married a lovely, respectable, pure-blood marriage. marriages, but Andromeda married a Muggle-born, Ted Tonks. So Sirius mimed blasting the tapestry with the wand and laughed sourly. Harry, however, did not laugh. He was too busy staring at the names to the right of Andromeda's burn mark. A double line of golden embroidery linked Narcissa Black with Lucius Malfoy, and a single vertical gold line from their names led to the name Draco. You're related to the Malfoys! The pureblood families are all interrelated, said Sirius. If you're only going to let your sons and daughter marry purebloods, your choice is very limited. There are hardly any of us left. Molly and I are cousins by marriage, and Arthur's like my second cousin once removed. But there's no point in looking for them on here. If there ever was a family, a bunch of blood traders, it's the Weasleys. But Harry was now looking at the name connected to the left of Andromeda's urn. Bellatrix Black, which was connected by a double line to Rodolphus Lestrange. Strange, Harry said aloud. The names had stirred something in his memory. He knew it from somewhere, but for a moment he couldn't think where. Though it gave him an odd creeping sensation in the pit of his stomach. They're in Azkaban, said Sirius shortly. You should remember why Harry is having this creeping sensation, whether you're a new Potterhead or advanced. Harry looked at him curiously. Bellatrix and her husband Rodolphus came in with Barty Crouch Jr., said Sirius in the same brusque voice. Rodolphus's brother, Rabastan, was with them too. And Harry remembered, and hopefully you should too with this. He had seen Bellatrix inside Dumbledore's pensive, the strange device in which thoughts and memories could be stored. A tall, dark woman with heavy-lidded eyes, who stood at her trial and proclaimed her continuing allegiance to Lord Voldemort, her pride that she had tried to find him after his downfall, and her conviction that she would one day be rewarded for her loyalty. I never said she was your... It doesn't matter if she's my cousin, snapped Sirius. As far as I'm concerned, they're not my family. She's certainly not my family. I haven't seen her since I was your age, unless you count a glimpse of her coming into Azkaban. Do you think I'm proud for having relatives like her? I certainly wouldn't. And this revelation makes advanced Potterheads know this revelation is kind of heartbreaking in a sense. Sorry, said Harry quickly. I didn't mean. I was just surprised, that's all. It doesn't matter. Don't apologize, Sirius mumbled at once. He turned away from the tapestry, his hands deep in his pockets. I don't like being back here, he said, staring across the drawing room. I never thought I'd be stuck in this house again. Harry understood completely. He knew how he would feel if forced when he was grown up and thought he was free of the place forever, to return and live at number 4 Pivot Drive. It's ideal for headquarters, of course, Sirius said. My father put every security measure known to wizard kind on it when he lived here. It's unplottable, so muggles could never come and call, as if they wanted to, and now Dumbledore's added his protection, so you'd be hard to put a safe for house anywhere. Dumbledore's secret keeper for the Order, you know. Nobody can find headquarters unless he tells them personally where it is. That note Moody showed you last night, that was from Dumbledore. Sirius gave a short bark-like laugh. A very dog-like. If my parents could see the use it was being put to now, well, my mother's portraits should give you some idea. He scowled for a moment, then sighed. I wouldn't mind if I could just get out occasionally and do something useful. I've asked Dumbledore whether I can escort you to your hearing, as simple as obviously, so I can give you a bit of moral support. What do you think? Harry felt as though his stomach had sunk through the dusty carpet. He had not thought about the hearing once since dinner the previous evening, and the excitement of being back with the people he liked best, of hearing everything that was going on, it had completely flown his mind. At Sirius's words, however, a crushing sense of dread returned to him. He stared at Hermione and the Weasleys, all tucking into their sandwiches, and thought how he would feel if they went back to Hogwarts without him. Don't worry, Sirius said. Harry looked up and realized that Sirius had been watching him. I'm sure they're going to clear you. There's definitely something in the International Statute of Secrecy about being allowed to use magic to save your own life. But if they do expel me, said Harry quietly, can I come back here and live with you? Sirius smiled sadly. Oh, advanced Potterheads know why I'm having this reaction. We'll see. I'd feel a lot better about the hearing if I knew it didn't have to go back to the Dursleys. Harry pressed him. Yeah, I know that feeling all too well. Yes, it's a Taylor Swift reference. Hopefully you realized that. Moving forward. It must be bad if you prefer this place, said Sirius gloomily. Hurry up, you two, or there won't be any food left, Mrs. Weasley called. Sirius heaved another great sigh, cast a dark look at the tapestry, and both he and Harry went to join the others. Harry tried his best not to think about the hearing while they emptied the glass cabinets that afternoon. Fortunately for him, it was a job that required a lot of concentration, as many of the objects in there seemed very reluctant to leave their dusty shelves. Am I the only one that gets Beauty and the Beast vibes with that statement? Sirius sustained a bad bite from a silver snuff box. Within seconds, his bitten hand had developed an unpleasant crusty covering, like a tough brown glove. It's okay, he said, examining the hand with interest before tapping it lightly with his wand and restoring its skin to normal. Must be cat powder in there. He threw the box aside into the sack where they were depositing the debris from the cabinets. Harry saw George wrap his own hand in it carefully in the cloth moments later, and sink the box into his already doxy-filled pocket. They found an unpleasant-looking silver instrument, something like a many-liked pair of tweezers, which scuttled up to Harry's arm like a spider. When he picked it up and attempted to puncture his skin, Harry seized it and smashed it with a heavy book entitled Nature's Nobility, a Wizarding Genealogy. That sounds like it would be interesting, honestly. There was a musical box that emitted a faintly sinister twinkling tune when wound, and they all found themselves becoming curiously weak and sleepy, until Ginny had the sense to slam the lid shut. Also a heavy locket that none of them could open, a number of ancient seals, and in a dusty box, an Order of Merlin, first class, that had been awarded to Sirius's grandfather for services to the ministry. It means he gave them a lot of gold, said Sirius contemptuously, throwing the medal into the rubbish sack. Several times, creatures slided into the room and attempted to smuggle things, away under his loincloth, muttering horrible curses every time they caught him at it. When Sirius wrestled a large golden ring bearing the black crest from his grip, Creature actually burst into furious tears and left the room sobbing under his breath and calling Sirius names Harry had never heard before. "It was my father's," said Sirius, throwing the ring into the sack. "Creature wasn't quite as devoted to him as my mother, but I caught him snuggling a pair of my father's old trousers last week." That just sounds. Ugh, I don't even want to know. Mrs. Weasley kept them all working very hard over the next few days. The drawing room took 3 days to decontaminate. Finally, the only undesirable things left in it were the tapestry of the Black family tree, which resisted all their attempts to remove it from the wall, and the rattling writing desk. Moody had not dropped by headquarters yet, so they could not be sure what was inside it. They moved from the drawing room to a dining room on the ground floor, where they found spiders as large as saucers lurking in the dresser. Ron left the room hurriedly to make a cup of tea, and did not return for an hour and a half. Oh, poor Ron. Here's a hug for you. But I'm sure my mom and grandma can definitely relate to that movement. See, I don't have arachnophobia, but if I were to see that, yeah, that probably would trigger arachnophobia for me. Moving forward, the sign on which bore the black crest and motto was all thrown unceremoniously into a sack by Sirius, and the same fate met a set of old photographs in tarnished silver frames, all of whose occupants squealed shrilly as the glass covering them smashed. Snape might refer to their work as cleaning, but in Harry's opinion, they were really waging war on the house, which was putting up a very good fight, aided and abetted by Creature. The house elf kept appearing wherever they were congregated, his muttering becoming more and more offensive as he attempted to remove anything he could from the rubbish sacks. Sirius went as far as to threaten him with clothes, but Creature fixed him with a watery stare and said, "Master must do what Master wishes," before turning away and muttering very loud, "Master will not turn Creature away now, because Creature knows what they are up to. Oh yes, he is plotting against the Dark Lord, yes, with these mudbloods, traitors, and scum." At which Sirius, ignoring Hermione's protest, seized Creature by the back of his loincloth and threw him bodily from the room. The doorbell rang several times a day, which was the cue for Sirius's mother to start shrieking again, and for Harry and the others to attempt to eavesdrop on the visitor. Though they gleaned very little from the brief glimpses and snatches of conversation, they were able to sneak before Mrs. Weasley recalled to them to their task. Snape flitted in and out of the house several times more, though to Harry's relief they never came face to face. He also caught sight of his Transfiguration teacher, Professor McGonagall, looking very odd in a muggle dressing coat, though she also seemed too busy to linger. Sometimes, however, the visitors stayed to help. Tonks joined them for a memorable afternoon, at which they found a murderous old ghoul lurking in an upstairs toilet, and Lupin, who was staying in the house with Sirius, but who acted for long periods to do mysterious work for the Order, helped them repair a grandfather clock that had developed the unpleasant habit of shooting heavy bolts at passers-by. Mundungus redeemed himself slightly in Mrs. Weasley's eyes by rescuing Ron from an ancient set of purple robes that had tried to strangle him when he removed them from their wardrobe. Despite the fact he was still sleeping badly, still having dreams about corridors and locked doors that made his scar prickle, Harry was managing to have fun for the first time all summer. As long as he was busy, he was happy. When the action abated, however, Whenever he dropped his guard, or lay exhausted in bed watching four shadows move across the ceiling, the thought of the looming ministry hearing returned to him. Fear jabbed at his insides like needles as he wondered what was going to happen if he was expelled. The idea was so terrible that he did not dare voice it out loud, not even to Ron and Hermione, who, though he often saw them whispering together and casting anxious looks in his direction, followed his lead in not mentioning it. Sometimes he could not prevent his imagination showing him a faceless ministry official, who was snapping his wand in two and ordering him back to the Dursleys. But he would not go. He was determined on that. He would come back here to Grimmauld Place and look Sirius. He felt as though a brick had dropped into his stomach when Mrs. Weasley turned to him during dinner on Wednesday evening and said quietly, "I've ironed your best clothes for tomorrow morning, Harry, and I want you to wash your hair tonight, too. A good first impression can work wonders." And I quite agree. But I believe in personality more than appearance. Ron, Hermione, Fred, George, and Ginny all stopped talking and looked over at him. Harry nodded and tried to keep eating his chops, but his mouth had become so dry he could not chew. "How am I getting there?" he asked Mrs. Weasley, trying to sound unconcerned. "Arthur's taking you to work with him," Ron voiced. "Arthur's taking you to work with him," said Mrs. Weasley gently. Mr. Weasley smiled encouragingly at Harry across the table. "You can wait in my office until it's time for the hearing," he said. Harry looked over at Sirius, but before he could ask the question, Mrs. Weasley had answered it. "Professor Dumbledore doesn't think it's a good idea for Sirius to go with you, and I must say I think he's quite right," said Sirius through clenched teeth. Mrs. Weasley pursed her lips. "When did Dumbledore tell you that?" said Harry, staring at Sirius. "He came last night, when you were in bed," said Mr. Weasley. Sirius stabbed moodily at a potato with his fork. Harry dropped his own eyes to his plate. The thought that Dumbledore had been in the house on the eve of his hearing and not asked to see him made him feel, if that were possible, even worse. And that is the end of this celebratory chapter. I hope you enjoy it and enjoy making this as soon as I release the how to make this. But until next part, again, cheers to 100. Cheers to your support. We would not have made it to 100 without you.